Layer 8. Time for some fun. Oh yes, requirements and restrictions to attack. So there was a cranial insertion post, which is probably a good example of talking about requirements and restrictions. So my opponent attacks me with Gorm the Great and Okran Assassin. I control 3 creatures, and all 3 creatures are able to block either one of the attackers. What declaration of blockers are legal? So the answer is you can either have 2 blockers blocking Gorm and 1 blocker blocking Okran Assassin, 1 blocker blocking Gorm, 2 blockers blocking Okran Assassin, or all 3 blockers blocking Okran Assassin. So requirements and restrictions. Gorm and Okran Assassin create blocking requirements. You have to fulfill as many requirements as you can without disobeying any restrictions. There are no restrictions except for the implicit restriction that your blockers can't block more than one attacker. So Gorm creates 2 requirements. So the 2 requirements are Gorm must be blocked if able, and Gorm must be blocked by 2 or more creatures if able. An Okran Assassin creates 1 requirement per blocker. All creatures able to block Okran Assassin do so. So each of those 3 individual creatures has a requirement to attack Okran Assassin. So all 3 blockers blocking Okran Assassin fulfills 3 requirements. That's 3 out of 5. That's as many as we can do. So that's legal. If you move one of those to Gorm the Great, you're fulfilling 1 of Gorm's and 2 of Okran Assassin's. So that's still 3. So that's still okay. Moving 2 to Gorm the Great fulfills 2 of Gorm the Great's second requirements and 1 of Okran Assassin. So that's still 3 requirements. But if you put all 3 on Gorm the Great, you're only fulfilling 2 requirements, and that is not as many as 3. So that's not a legal thing. So you can't block Gorm the Great with 3. So yeah, you can basically, as long as you're maximizing the number of fulfilled requirements without disobeying any restrictions, that is the best set you can do. If you want to see more about this, there are papers on how, I think this problem is NP complete or something like that. People have gone into Magic Arena and confused I think, is it called Sparky? They've confused Sparky into trying to solve a problem where it's like, here are some creatures, you must go and find a valid set of requirements and restrictions. So MP hard, there we go, thank you. Yeah, there's an MP hard problem where it's like you must fulfill a certain number of requirements and restrictions, and watching Sparky try to fulfill those to declare a valid set of attacks. That's quite a good, and I think there's a maths paper on it as well. So fun. And also humans have to do that as well. So if you manage to do that to a human, that'll be fun. Yeah. Next one up, World Rule. Yeah, lovely new concordant crossroads is going to cause a whole bunch of fun by people not knowing about world enchantments. If 2 or more permanents have the super type world, all except the one that has the world super type for the shortest amount of time are put into their owner's graveyard. In the event of a tie for the shortest amount of time, all are put into their owner's graveyard. And this is called the World Rule. So you can only have 1 world enchantment. So that includes different types of world enchantment as well, reading that. So yeah, so concordant crossroads. Yeah, I really like the new art as well. I mean, yeah, the old art was fine, but it's nice to get some new art as well. It would be interesting to see how this plays, but I'm sure people will be excited to see this in coming Commander games once these secret layers are out. Do they have an enter the battlefield that says destroy all of the world channels? They don't have. No, it's not a trick. It is just a. I think it's a state-based action. I can't remember if I said it during the state-based action section, but I'm pretty sure it's a state-based action. Yeah, timing maze. This is what you used to have to do when casting a spell. back in the old days, this is how you worked out whether you could cast a spell or not. I do not know enough about this to talk about it at any length of time. But if your game is complicated enough that you have to go through a literal maze of flowcharting to work out if you can cast a spell, that system is bad. So, if you want to know more about this, go and Google timing maze. But for now, accept that this is awful, and we'll move on to something less bad. It is an absolute nightmare. This was in I think the Duel List, so you can go and see the original thing. The pre-6th edition rules were an absolute nightmare as far as I can tell. So yeah. Okay, here's a modern, but back to the future. Ragavan, or well, more accurately, Dash versus Dress Down. So if you have Dress Down and Ragavan, Ragavan doesn't have haste from the Dash. There is a dependency here, basically. There in layer 6, if you have Dress Down and Ragavan out at the same time, if you apply Dress Down first, then it means that Ragavan will lose all of its abilities. So it's going to always be applied that way, regardless of which one entered the battlefield first. So even if Ragavan enters the battlefield after Dress Down, it still will lose its ability. It's not going to gain Dash just because it was played afterwards. So yeah, that's an interesting one with like dependency. I think we do actually come on to dependencies a little bit later, but that's one that is modern relevant. Batches and series. I do not know enough about this to talk about it in any detail, but batches and series were really old ways of dealing with things. I couldn't actually find a definition of series. I think reading the rules at the time, it's similar to our priority system, in that it basically gave you windows in which to do things. But batches were kind of weird. So here we go. It's a series of non-interrupt fast effects that build on one another as players respond to each other's spells. They resolve by first in, last out for all effects. Damage isn't done until the end of the batch. So yeah, it's just old. The old rules were a nightmare for stuff like this. It's just like, oh yeah, and at the point of dealing damage, now the window that you can actually save things open. It's old rules, and it's a nightmare to talk about. So we'll move on to Morphs and Mystic Forge. So yeah, in general, if to determine whether permission applies to a spell you're trying to cast, you always look at what the spell's going to look like when it's on the stack. So the ruling on Mystic Forge here, even though the top of your library might not actually be a colorless non-land card, if it's a card with Morph, you can cast it face down from the top of your library, even if it's not normally colorless. So there's a ruling on this, on the card for Mystic Forge itself. So yeah, if the top of your library is a colored card with Morph, you can cast it with Mystic Forge as a face down cast. On to the fun one, timing of taking off your pants. Good old silver bordered cards. Yeah. So Mark Rosewater, can I remove my pants? This was the most popular question asked at the Unglued pre-release. The answer is yes, you may, but only if the attire under your jeans meets so they have to be denim jeans specifically, meets the decency requirements of the setting of the game occurs in. So for example, if it's inappropriate to sit in your briefs in the game store, then you cannot remove your pants. And how fast can you remove your pants? Removing clothing is faster than mana source speed. Did you think this QAS would get this weird? Yes, I did. Good old UN cards. So yeah, it's faster than mana, which mana abilities are pretty fast. So yeah. Here's a good one. Mutating Phage. So Confirmed by the, I believe, current rules advisor, rule manager sort of thing. If Phage enters the battlefield without being cast from hand, the first ability of Phage would trigger. So if it enters the battlefield, if you didn't cast it from your hand, you lose the game. If you mutate Sea Dasher Octopus onto her in response to the lose the game ability, that ability, when that ability resolves, the mutate stack contains an element that was cast from hand. And so the ability looks at it and goes, you cast it from your hand. You do not lose the game. So you can save Phage. I mean, it's not very useful for commander games, but there are mono black things and there are ways of giving things flash. So I assume if there is a way of flash mutating a black mutate creature onto Phage, that is a way of having Phage as a commander. So if you manage to do that in commander, let me know, and I'll send you something special. That'll be neat. So yeah, that's a fun one. Yeah, mutate, just a source of absolute joy for rules, I think. For Horsemen, this one, I'm not going to go into huge details about it, but for Horsemen was a deck played to try and win through basically pinging. So Basalt Monolith and Mesmeric Orb allows you to mill arbitrary numbers of cards from your deck. So Basalt Monolith taps for 3 and then you can pay 3 to untap it. Mesmeric Orb says whenever your permanent you control is tapped, you put a card from you mill a card. That allows you to mill Narcomoeba and Dread Return, which allows you to return a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield, which allows you to return Shroom, the Hegemon, and Blasting, which then returns Blasting Station from your graveyard to the battlefield. At which point, then you have Emrakul come into play. You mill Emrakul, and you shuffle your graveyard into your library. This is non-deterministic, so there is no guarantee that you will ever be able to do this combination. It's illegal in it's basically you'll get done for slow play in paper. You could try and do it on Magic Online. Unlikely that there's going to be a way for you to track, but doing anything on Magic Online in the timer's probably going to be the one that kills you anyway. Yeah, so Emrakul is the piece that makes it work. Emrakul is also the piece that breaks it. And if it was like stacking it in a deterministic way, it might be better. But because of the randomness, I think it's the bit that causes the problem. But yeah, it's the exciting one. Yeah, so the win condition for this is you get Blasting Station onto the battlefield. You shuffle everything into your deck. You then mill the Narcomoebas. Then you sacrifice the Narcomoebas to the Blasting Station, and then you mill the Emrakul again. So there's no guarantee that you're going to mill Narcomoebas before you mill Emrakuls, and so there's no guarantee. And there's no guarantee you even get the combo off in the first place. There's no guarantee that you manage to mill the 3 Narcomoebas and the Dread Return and the Shroom and the Blasting Station before you hit the Emrakul. So yeah, there's that's the excitement that you get. So yeah, 4 Horsemen. It's a good theoretical deck. It doesn't work very well in practice. Yay, damage prevention window. Okay, good. So nonsense. More nonsense from the old days. So at the end of a batch, we mentioned batches just recently. We still have a bunch of damage to assign. So at the end of a batch, you have the damage prevention step. So it's the only time in the old days when players are allowed to cast spells or abilities that specifically prevent damage, like Circle of Protection Red or Healing Salve. Much like Regeneration, at no other point in time could those abilities at the time be activated or spells cast. And if the damage is not prevented and is sufficient to destroy a creature at the time, there is an opportunity to use regeneration spells or abilities, like if the creature was being killed by a Cinder Cloud. Again, just a different time for working out. Obviously at the time they had a bunch of spells, a bunch of cards that hadn't really gone through a rigorous design process, and they're trying to make them all work together. And this was the best they had at the time. Is it somewhere in the timing? Almost certainly there is somewhere in the timing maze, which is the damage prevention window. Almost certainly. Yay, Devotion Secret Lair. Not Secret Lair. It's the Secret Lair. There is no Devotion Secret Lair, although there probably will be at some point. So Devotion is calculated somewhere in between layers 3 and layers 4. The Altar of the Pantheon is a weird card. A player's devotion to each colour and combination of colours, taking into account any effects that modify devotion, is calculated after copy, control, and text change effects, but before any other effects that modify characteristics. It only affects Altar of the Pantheon. The reason it needs to be this is devotion needs to be determined after layer 1 in order for something that copies the altar to work correctly. It needs to be determined before layer 4 in order for altar to work with the gods. And it needs to be determined after layer 6 in order for altar to lose all abilities. So if something made it lose all abilities, it would have to be after there as well. So you can't have all of those be true. Not all of those things are, there are 3 requirements there. And the one that loses there is loses all abilities. So if you have an Altar of the Pantheon that loses all of its abilities, it still contributes to its devotion. Yes. These are the weirdnesses of Magic the Gathering, and especially cards such commons. They put this effect on a common. Like, come on, seriously, what are you doing? But it templates so cleanly that unfortunately, when you actually come to what does that mean, that the rules, sometimes take a backseat to clean templating. And that it's just a hand wavy make it work sort of thing. So yeah, Devotion Secret Lair is a good one. Typeless Permanents. This was my first ever short video on the channel. You can have Typeless Permanents in 2 separate different ways. Neurok Transmuter and March of the Machines and a non-creature artifact allows you to create a permanent that is a blue. It's just a blue. It is not an artifact. It's not a creature. It's not anything. It's just blue. Another thing you can do is with Mutate from Ikoria, you can mutate on top of a god. And if you somehow go under the devotion count at that point, then if the mutator is on top of the god, it is no longer a creature. And because mutate creatures on top, they're only just creatures, it's no longer a creature. It's no longer anything. It is just a typeless permanent. So yeah, you can end up with typeless permanents in 2 different ways. If you haven't checked that out, that was one of my very first shorts. So go see that. Control player effects override one another, which is kind of an interesting one. I didn't honestly know that it worked like this, but it's in the rules. So if you have multiple player controlling effects affecting the same player, they overwrite each other. So if somebody uses a Mindslaver on player C and then another player uses Mindslaver on player C, player B goes away in that time. They lose the game. When player C's turn starts, they're not controlled by player A. That effect has just gone because player B overwrote it, and then player B doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, bit of a weird one, but I think conceptually you're thinking, well, there's multiple effects, right? And generally multiple effects, timestamps win, and the latest timestamp one would just win. No, it just overwrites it. Don't know why. Player A is sad. Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense. Animate Dead versus Clone. Oh god, yeah. So back in the day, another one. Back in 1994, Animate Dead, Clone and Doppelganger could only copy permanents created by a summon or an artifact creature spell or tokens that inherently count as creatures. Copy Artifact can only copy permanents created by an artifact or an artifact creature spell or tokens that inherently count as artifacts, and they explicitly call out to say they cannot copy an animated dead creature. So yeah, back in 1994, just didn't work at all. Rules. Obviously nowadays this works. Maybe it's because back in the day it was like it animated dead creature, something like that. They had inconsistent rulings at the time, but yeah, it was exciting. But obviously it works nowadays, so yeah. Teysa Karlov versus Massacre Girl. Okay, so Teysa Karlov says if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. It does not double the death triggers of Massacre Girl. So Massacre Girl, whenever a creature dies this turn, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets -1/-1 until end of turn. That ability is set up by the first triggered ability of Massacre Girl. So when Massacre Girl enters the battlefield, each other creature gets a -1/-1 until end of turn. It also then sets up a delayed triggered ability which says whenever a creature dies this turn, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets -1/-1 until end of turn. It is not it's not a triggered ability of the Massacre Girl permanent. It is just a triggered ability of a triggered ability. And so it does not interact with Teysa Karlov at all. Fun times. It does not double. You will be sad. If Massacre Girl directly said, whenever a creature dies this turn, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets -1/-1 until end of turn, then it would work. If that was literally an ability, like if at the start of the line it said whenever a creature dies this turn, that would then trigger twice. But because it is written within the resolution of the first ability, it doesn't. So yeah, weird. Good old weirdness. Interrupts and mana sources. These are old. Again, timing is old. Interrupts were an obsolete card type. Everything that was an interrupt is now an instant. Abilities that, as Brinton said, you could play as an interrupt can now be activated like any other abilities, unless they're mana abilities. So basically just a fast way of dealing with things. But they had slightly different timing windows back in the day. Mana sources were similar. They were cards that generated mana when they resolved. So like Dark Ritual was a mana source. Okay, Multani's Presence nerf. So back in the day, Multani's Present... when I say back in the day, currently a spell fizzling doesn't resolve. So previously, before Dominaria, we'd say it was going to be countered on resolution. So in the game rules, the game it would be countered due to the game rules. If a spell was failing to resolve because a target had become invalid. The only card that cares about this is Multani's Presence. The only card that cared about spells being countered. So this could trigger off spells failing to resolve because their counters, their targets are no longer valid. No longer works. So this is red. It should probably be orange as well. But yeah, it's a fun time. Lazav and flip cards. I do actually have a video on this. Lazav and flip cards. Flipped and unflipped is one of the 4 binary states that a card can have. So you can have flipped and unflipped, tapped and untapped, phased in, phased out, face up, face down. It's also the only one that is irreversible, so you cannot unflip a card. Currently. I doubt that's going to change in the future, but currently you cannot unflip a card. If Lazav copies a flip card, you flip it due to the flippability of that flip card, and then you copy another flip card, that permanent will be flipped. You'll have the flipped side of that second copy flip card. It's pretty neat. I mean, it's not very strong, but it's kind of a cool thing. You don't have to reflip it the second time you copy. You'll get the second time. Quicken and Suspend. Pretty neat one if you haven't seen this before. So casting Quicken. Quicken says the next sorcery card you cast this turn can be cast as though it had flash. Casting Quicken allows you to suspend a card at instant speed until you cast a sorcery, but it does not use up that permission. So there is a ruling on the Quicken card itself. After it resolves, you can suspend a sorcery in your hand at any time you can cast an instant. As soon as you actually cast a sorcery, you lose this capability. So you can suspend as many things at instant speed as you want after casting Quicken until you cast a sorcery. You don't even have to cast a sorcery. You can suspend anything you want as long as you have the mana for it. Which is bizarre. Kind of bizarre that it interacts that way. I don't think it operates the same way with Foretell, because Foretell doesn't care about being done at a sorcery speed. But yeah, it's a fun little interaction with the suspend special action. Phase abilities. Alongside activating and triggered abilities in the 90s, hooray for the 90s, they had phase abilities, which were like the unholy marriage of the two. So Black Vice is the example here. You had effects that were activated manually during the phase that were in as fast effects, but you couldn't leave the phase without dealing with all of them. So yeah, it's an obsolete term. They've all been errata to actually go towards triggering at like the beginning of the relevant phase. So this one, I think Black Vice now triggers at the beginning of your upkeep rather than just you choosing it. So yeah, it's the during phase abilities are weird. Basically, it's a relic of the 90s again. Portal, good old Portal. Portal sets were trying to create simplified Magic experience, so they only had lands, creatures, and sorceries. Except that's not quite true because they totally had instants. They were just printed as sorceries with special timing restrictions that said that they could be used at instant speed, or when they could be actually cast. So Assassin's Blade, for example, you play Assassin's Blade only after you're attacked before you declare interceptors. All the cards with such a relevant thing are now actual instants. They've been errated to be actual instants. So yes, they had sorcery counter spells. Yeah, that sounds about right. That sounds about right. Good old Portal. Gilded Drake. Holly McFarlane mentioned this in chat not very long ago. But yeah, Gilded Drake. Gilded Drake is a freak of nature currently. The current Oracle text is, when it enters the battlefield, exchange control of Gilded Drake and up to one target creature an opponent controls. If you don't or can't make an exchange, you sacrifice Gilded Drake. This ability still resolves if the target becomes illegal. Now, that's an interesting last point, because it doesn't actually mean if the target becomes illegal, you are still allowed to exchange Gilded Drake and the thing that is illegal. That doesn't happen. You can't exchange something if the target is illegal. What it means is, if the target becomes illegal, you're still going to sacrifice Gilded Drake. They've gone very, very hard out of the way to make sure that you sacrifice if the other target becomes illegal, essentially. So yeah, it's one of the weirdest text wordings to make sure that you are actually if you don't do the thing it wants you to do, it will be sacrificed, essentially. So yeah, fun times. Gilded Drake, one of those really weird ones. Okay, next one. Only one main phase. Apparently before 6th edition there was only one main phase. You can do combat during your main phase. So yeah, Carpenter Flowers, the text for Carpenter Flowers says during your main phase there was only one. It's just combat was a thing you could do. Obviously now we have sensible things where we have one main phase and then combat and then a second main phase and everything is happy. Cranking Faerie, Aerie, and Arms Depot. So yeah, Maro's a little bit inconsistent on the concepts for contraptions and cranking. So you're allowed to crank a token producing contraption. So when you crank it, you move the sprocket counter and then you crank all the contraptions on that sprocket, I think. So you're allowed to crank Faerie Aerie, create the tokens. So yeah, the trigger resolves, create the tokens, and then you crank Arms Depot on the same sprocket, and you can target. Arms Depot says when you crank it, you can put 2 counters onto the token that you just created, which is nonsense. That's not how triggers work. But yeah, a little bit inconsistent. Apparently, there's different methods, and it's silver border, so it's whatever is fun.